Okay. What were you also studying out-of-body experience when you were at INSCOM?
Well, yeah, I'm familiar with sensory deprivation. I actually had a sensory deprivation tank because when you get into near-death experiences, and remember, this is where all these things, the time frame blend back and feather, so you have civilian and military applications concurrently in many areas. In NDEs, near-death experience, autoscopic, what they call is seeing your body from being outside, is one of the critical things. And then one of the issues that had come up with remote viewing is, where's consciousness? And there are some studies. What's the guy's name? It was a guy at Maimonides had done some studies, and they were wondering whether or not is consciousness as we know it is here, or is it physically at the location, and is that a requirement? Alex Tanis is the guy's name. And the experiments there where they had him, because he said, I'm going out of my body. And what they did is they put at a different location inside the same building. They had a target, but the target was generated in such a way, they had like wheels and things that would show up. The only way you could see the proper one is if physically your point of origin was at one location. Otherwise, the other things wouldn't line up correctly. They also put in strain gauges to sense, is there something there? You can argue what that something is, but it talks to the potential for a physical interaction as opposed to just pure consciousness or pure thought. And they were able to prove pretty conclusively that, at the time that he would report being out of body, that they were sensing something at the point, and then he could accurately, most of the time, report not 100%. And that's one of the problems. A lot of these things are never 100% sort of thing. But in order to see the representation and report on it correctly, the point of origin had to be at this known location, which suggested that, it was out of body. And again, this is something that's reported quite frequently as part of near-death experience, but not necessarily all of them. You had a recent guest, and I don't want to put him on the spot or speak for him, but Ryan Hendrickson. Who has an experience, and I've talked to him since. I found it absolutely fascinating. I recommend it to everybody. A very inspirational kind of event. But steps on a IED in Afghanistan, literally blows his leg off. But what interested me in the words that I heard there is he's talking about the life review, about being able to see this thing. And I've been able to talk to him. I won't go into it because he can discuss it if he wants, but it was very much, his perception was a little different from most of them, but it was, that he understood not only the event, but how that event impacted others from an emotional standpoint. And that is also one of the common features of many near-death experiences. I'll tell you that there's never anything that's absolute 100%. I mean, many of these things have infinite variations. But, the question was, I hope Joe mentions some, because he talks about some of the things that happened to him, and that one of the questions that's come up is, can you sense an out-of-body or a consciousness being there? And there's a whole field on how do you do psychic protection to protect the individual, protect yourself if you're doing those sorts of things.
Have you come up with any conclusions?
None of these have conclusions.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Now, what we do, and one of the big issues that's come up on Skinwalker, you've probably heard about the hitchhiker effect, of where things have followed some of these people. And what I did last time I was at the ranch, do certain protections, Native American smudging, for instance, as an example. I've talked to Colin Kelleher, who's was one of the key people, particularly in the OSAP program, and he was at NIDS. We were there at the same time and spent a lot of time at the ranch, and say they would go through kind of protective measurements, and this is in the if you believe category, but can't hurt.
Yeah. I have a question. At your time at INSCOM, you're studying all these things, out-of-body experience, remote viewing, primary perception, the Hutchinson effect, neurolinguistic programming. How are you recruiting your subjects? These people that have these abilities, that can bend metal, that can remote view. How are you finding them?
Yeah, that's there weren't them. We didn't actually do recruiting. Now, I mean, with Clave, the subjects basically were me. I would. It's like we get into non-lethal weapons and things like that. I do these things. I've been shot by all of the systems, and when we were doing it, I go out and do these things. The same with Hutchison. Yeah, I was the one directly involved in getting them, bringing in other scientists, but basically as observers to authenticate that what we were getting was real. The one where we did the pistol shooting that I mentioned in Project Jedi, not sure how, but when we were able to get maybe 30 people. I'm not sure exactly how we did that. You gotta remember, we're talking almost 40 years ago. In some cases, it is 40.
The reason I'm asking is because we could put something out right now saying, "Hey, we want people to email into this email if you have an ability that you can bend metal." I don't know the percentage. I would assume that 99% of the people that email in are completely full of shit. And so that's kind of what. How did you sift through and find these people?
What you're arguing to here or discussing is the difference between the Soviet approach and our approach. And that was one of the key things that the question was, do I take intelligence people and teach them to be psychics or have those capabilities, or do I take psychics and teach them the additional skills? The Soviet approach was to go out with a broad net and look for people with the skills and then bring them in. Ours was, I think, much more constrained, and if you look at the people who were brought into the program, a lot of them didn't know they had these capabilities.
Interesting.
And one of the things in the program, you mentioned Stargate, because that's the best known. It had a number of names before that. But they were doing personality tests specifically to address your question. Where do you look? Do you find people? And they did find MBTI was something we used. Myers-Briggs Type Indicator was one of several ones that.
What is that? What is that?
Well, it is it's a very well-known psychological instrument that has the 16 categories of. I'm an INTP.
Okay.
But looking for when they tested the people who had these innate capabilities. And now, there's another question that has come up, and that is it better to find a natural, or can you train the capability? And that's where the guy you interviewed yesterday, Joe McMoneagle, is, quote, a natural. And he was remote viewer 001, and I'm sure described all that. We found other people. Well, did he go into Ingo Swann? Because what happened was one of the three people that SRI used initially was an artist in New York, Ingo Swann, and he came up with his context of the matrix. So the critical question is this a trainable skill? And now there are people out there now in the world teaching remote viewing. And there are people who do it naturally. And I would argue that it's like all skills. Everybody has some skill at it, but, I'm never going to run a 4-minute mile. Know that. So there are, can I get better? Yeah. And that's true with most people. Do people have psychic experiences in it? Absolutely. Do they recognize them? Maybe, maybe not. There are a lot of people who will deny it, but, when you get into it, the phone ringing, knowing who it is, that was before we had caller ID. But there were things like that made sense. So I don't want to take anybody's living away, but it's, can you improve? Yes. Are you going to be a Joe McMoneagle? Yeah, probably not, depending on where you are. And so having natural skills. We saw, by the way, one of the things that came up in near-death experience, initially we thought you had a discrete event that happened in a very short period of time. And that was a precipitating event that might have happened, accident, illness, whatever. What we found over time is many of these people increased in psychic capability. We had a lot of them who became particularly psychokinetic. I couldn't wear sensitive electronic equipment or being around that. Became telepathic, became precognitive, and that seemed to increase after NDE. So these events are happening out there. Yeah, can you enhance it? Yes. Can we program it? Are there potential dangers? Yeah, there are, and that's the piece that nobody wants to talk about. I don't know if you use this, but my digression, talk because he's dead, was Subelbein, who after retirement, and we stayed friends for a long time, and he went off the cliff. And one of the dangers we've seen when I had put together the UFO group, one of the things we agreed to do was to watch each other, specifically because we had some people literally go crazy and say, if you see somebody going off the cliff, you'll say, you're going off the cliff. Doesn't mean you pull them back or stop them, but we agreed that we would watch each other. And if you see the symptoms, do it. And there were several that, just there's no other word for it, but
wow.
Yeah.
So all of this has to do with human consciousness.
With what?
All of this has to do with human consciousness, right. Obviously. The stuff with the plant really gets me. The plant. Mm. Do plants have consciousness?
Yes. Well, let me drop back even further than that. And this is the fundamental issue. If you're familiar with Max Planck, German physicist and that, and use his quote or approximation is that consciousness is fundamental. You cannot get behind consciousness. And the implication here is that the physical arises from the consciousness, as opposed to consciousness arising from the physical, i.e. being something that's generated in the brain. We're into deep philosophical kinds of things, but that's pretty profound.
Yes.
Because everybody has thought, I think, therefore I am. No, you am, therefore you think, is kind of more appropriate. But it gets into, just everything. So everything is interrelated at a level that's almost definitely impossible for humans to contemplate. It's that big.
I don't know whether to have this conversation right now or wait till the end, because I know we have so much more to cover. But
okay, well,
where do you think
we can move it?
Where do you
Besides,
think?
they can cut and splice.
Yeah, where do you think consciousness exists?
Oh, consciousness is. We exist because of consciousness, not the other way around.
Is consciousness?
If there's a Big Bang, I happen to have some problems with that, but it says that consciousness created that, and everything, the physical universe evolved from consciousness.
We had spoken on the phone a little bit about some of the intelligence failures that you're aware of, and I would like you to expound on that a little bit here on the show.
Well, there are various ones. There's certain ones we can go into Vietnam, but the one I was explaining I was invited to a classified conference down at MacDill on future technology. And we listened to, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And so finally I'm sitting there and I said, has anybody heard of Purple Rain? Which is not the name of the program, but I got this blank stare and whatnot. I said, well, your future technology, we deployed 30 years ago. Where is the institutional memory? So Pete Schumacher was then the sync. We still had syncs of SOCOM, and I wrote him a letter and said, here's an example, but somebody needs some oversight here. We need a graybeards panel of people who remember some of these things, because across the board in soft units, they operate in small groups. Information goes around. They're very innovative, so a lot of these things work. But if you're going to get this out, there has to be some way to make the information more available. The result was that he set up a panel, like I described, with people from various elements of the soft thing that could come in and look at these various technologies. And we did that for several years.
What kind of technologies?
Well, like I say, this was one, it's been uncovered now. Specifically, they were looking at ammunition that would explode.
Okay.
And the new idea was that we would insert information or ammunition into enemy stockpiles. And we actually did that in Vietnam. We had, the 7.62, their calibers, the stuff for their AKs and others. And you would take, in this case, an entire clip, and one or two rounds would be so you could fire it, and then it would, blow up on them. And the idea was not just blowing up individual weapons; it was obviously making them question the reliability of the system. So you're attacking something much bigger than just blowing up a single weapon. But that was a specific example, and we used to do that. I carried certain round clips with me that when we found a cache would leave some behind, and then I had to report by the grid coordinates as to where that went in.
Interesting.
And again, nobody, when you ask these young, bright, innovative folks, thought it was probably a neat idea, but also thought they thought of it.
That was happening all the way back then. I did not know that.
Well, and my concern is that those sorts of things still are. Because, like I say, information does not get spread. It gets spread, word of mouth. People who are from the A team. Oh, we did this, but we have a propensity for reinventing wheels.
I'm 100%.
I'm sure
with
that's
you
in TTP too.